And we'd like to say, and welcome back David Muir, our friend. Very good to see you, David. Tonight, 2020, looking back at the 10-year anniversary of the conviction of Stacy Castor. Now, this was a case that was notorious here in central New York and nationwide in the spotlight again. Why did ABC's 2020 decide to take a look back at this case 10 years later?
Well, first of all, I should point out to your viewers, Christie and Jeff, that we thank you both because you both reported on this extensively at the time with the team there at Channel 9, and you play an enormous role in this 2-hour documentary tonight in sort of weaving together this incredible tale. One of the reasons we decided to look back at this case is the benefit of time. When we cover these cases in real time, it's just the piece by piece of the case. What's the jury going to decide? But 10 years later, when you look back and you piece this together, it becomes even more difficult to believe that Stacy Castor would have been capable of doing this. Keep in mind, this all started with that first call to 911. She said her husband was in the bedroom. He was gasping for air. They'd had a fight, going into the weekend. And, they raced to the house. At first, it looks like perhaps this was suicide, a depressed guy. And he dies. But it didn't add up, Christie, as you know, and there were detectives on the case who said, something just isn't right. They discovered the turkey baster in the kitchen, and again, you'll be reminded tonight the central role that one turkey baster plays in this case. They then look into her early life, the first husband who died young too, and they make that controversial decision to exhume his body. And when they do, they find those telltale crystals of antifreeze in his body as well. And Stacy Castor, as we all reported at the time, but looking back now, it becomes abundantly clear that she sensed the heat. The intense scrutiny was beginning to add up. And then you suddenly get that unbelievable third emergency call in Stacy Castor's life. This time it's the daughter being raced to the hospital near death. And the only difference this time is that the daughter wakes up. She wakes up with detectives around her in that room. And they ask her, why did you write that suicide note? Saying that you did this to your dad and you did this to your stepdad. And she says, what suicide note? And that was the moment, cracked wide open, and they knew, well, this woman is diabolical. Was she willing to do this to not only her second husband, they suspected the first husband too, and willing to kill her own daughter to make sure she stays a free woman? It's really still almost impossible to believe to this day, isn't it?
I think it certainly is. And David, you had the unique opportunity to actually talk to Stacy Castor, including after she was convicted. I mean, why do you think she picked you, and what was that like to talk to somebody who's a convicted killer like that?
Well, I think the reason she might have done the interview with me is, I started in my early days as a reporter in Syracuse, my hometown, and proudly. And I think she might have remembered me from that time. And, she was willing to do anything to become a free woman again. That's why I think she decided to do that second jailhouse interview. So you'll see both of those interviews in longer form tonight as we sort of dissect what they mean, different things that she said. And in that second interview, it was sort of extraordinary that there was still no remorse, no emotion. You remember her in the courtroom, but she was, stone cold. And I sat across from her, and there's one point in the interview where I say to her, if you didn't do this, there was only one other person who had access to these men, and that would be your daughter. And she just sat there and she nodded and looked me right in the eye. And I knew in that moment that, she's sticking to this. She's willing to frame her own daughter. In looking back over the course of both of those interviews, there was really only one moment when she broke from that cold persona where she was emotional. And you'll see what that moment was tonight as we put this all together. And I should say that it's also a really fascinating thing to watch if you're from Central New York, because there are moments with you, Christie, and you, Jeff, and you hear Rod and Carrie, and you're reminded about the whole news team there in your community covering this at the time. And I'm sure people thought at the time, this is a crazy story. But looking back on it, when it all comes together, you'll see how this not only affected Stacy Castor and her immediate family, her daughter at home and her two husbands, the entire extended family. Bill Fitzpatrick, who I grew up, and he was the DA, he's still there, charging strong forward. And you'll see the role that he played in that case as well. And one thing that I've never been really able to shake is the grandmother in the case. And I'm sure you remember her at the time. Here is a woman who's forced to choose between her own daughter or her granddaughter. And you'll be reminded in the documentary tonight what her choice was at the time. And I think you'll ask yourself, would you have been able to make that choice yourself?
Right, and David, we want our viewers to know this is not just a rehash of the case. As we talked to your producer about this, there's a lot of new information and some new video and new scenes. So this is going to be new for all of us in Central, even though we're familiar with the story.
No, a lot of it is new. And, you know, there are moments along the way. There's more insight to the family. There's more insight to Stacy Castor's early years, and you'll be able to sort of, you know, study the images that you're seeing on the screen as it plays out tonight. And these are new interviews with the DA and the prosecutors who helped, you know, prosecute this case, and the detectives. You know, Dominic Spinelli, you know, I'll never forget him from my early interviews with him, and he's back in the documentary tonight. And the benefit of having all of these years to think about the case and to look back at it, you're going to learn a lot more tonight that you didn't know in real time. And, you know, part of that is because you're covering it in real time and you've got to meet deadline. And it was an explosive case at the time, but just imagine what we've been able to do all these years later and putting together a 2-hour look. There are things that, you know, quite frankly, you won't believe.